Okay, hey, okay, welcome back. We've been away for a while. We promised that we would try to do this once a week, but I don't think we've always lived up to our promise. But you know what? We're persisting with it. I think this is episode,
as much as we can.
As much as we can. This is episode 5. My name is Sean Jacobs. I'm the editor of Africa as a Country.
I'm Zachary Rosen, member of the editorial board of Africa as a Country.
And the idea with this program was that we would like at least once a week, we'd meet and we would kind of talk about, I think we'll talk about just subjects that we think people are talking about or that we want people to talk about. I think with time we're realizing that we have to also talk a lot about what's on our website, so we'll try and talk a little bit more about some of the pieces that we're running.
Well, the site has great takes on what is happening, so
I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but we always get these emails that people send us where they always say like, you know, thank you for Africa as a Country for existing. I think I read something the other day that I saw that was really cool that said something like, I go to Africa as a Country, I know they're gonna write, you know, most of the time the stuff they can write about is about something terrible. But they always, she said something like, it was in Spanish I think, but they always make you feel that there's a way to work your way through it. Like they also offer like not necessarily like a program of action, but they'll talk about like, you know, what's politically possible or what have people done to cope with this particular thing, and that's a good thing about having a site like Africa as a Country.
Well, it's challenging you as a reader to think from different perspectives, to take historical context into account, and you know, when you do that, it's a tougher situation, it's more complex, but then you get closer to reality. So. No,
I mean, it's weird that we thought we're doing like the resume of the website or praising the website, but it is true that like there's a lot of content that exists now about Africa, Africans, Africa in the world. I mean, there's academic conferences, there's websites, but a lot of the stuff is clickbait. A lot of it is, I mean, I'm not casting any stones here, calm down.
Top 10 music videos.
Top 10, oh my God, okay, calm down.
Just
saying it.
There's all kinds of places
let's not create beef here, brother.
It's not.
We don't want beef, no, I'm just messing with you. I love beef, you know me, I love beef. But yeah, there's a lot of like clickbait, there's a lot of listicles, or there's just a lot of like writing about things that I think are like popular, like fads. I mean, I think we try very hard. I mean, the temptation probably for us could be there to say like, you know, people are talking about that particular thing, we should. Sometimes there's a necessity to write about it. But often we do say like, nah, that's just because everybody's talking about, I don't know, blackface at Vogue.
It's also the difference.
We know what they are. We know that that's wrong, and we know that you have to. Like, how many times do I have to tell you that's wrong? We've said that to you 10 years ago.
The difference in this is if you're simply trying to maximize the number of clicks, then you would operate one particular way, just being flashy and doing all kinds
of
like,
beef,
you know.
No, I'm messing. Keep going.
You wouldn't go so deep in what you're actually saying.
Yeah.
But if you have a real interest in informing people, in shifting conversations, in generating real awareness, then it's a different approach. So I think
I would add this. We're messing here with our first 20 minutes. We're doing this new thing now where we try to like be organized about talking about things.
Doesn't it seem so organized?
Seems so organized. But actually, it's an important topic because I think the other thing that I think we're trying to do better at is we're not trying to just chase like, okay, that's what everybody's talking about. We're also trying to shift conversations particularly. Okay, sometimes it might be an important anniversary of a particular historical event. Oh, this was actually the point I'm trying to make. I also like that we're trying to say what is at the heart of, like, for me especially, as somebody who started the whole thing.
Sure.
I don't know why I'm still around, but I should be doing other things with my life. Although I feel this is really important. Actually, let me say that it is really important. I believe in this. This is it. I really like that. What we also do is, God, now I've lost my. But you're gonna edit this. You're gonna edit this in the edit. God, what was I?
Why you do this? I don't know.
I mean, it was this thing about how you. Oh shit! I've lost the. We're gonna edit this out. Don't worry.
Sure, of course.
Wait, I had it. It wasn't. It was about like how we. Oh, okay. I got it. So cut. We're back. I'm gonna breathe, so it looks like we were talking. What I think we actually do is like taking what I think is like what I call the usable past. So we're also trying to remind people that like we're not the first people to think in this way. That some other kind of politics, some other kinds of way of existing, of being. Like people in Africa have thought about this before, and so we'll invite people to like reflect on like those historical connections or revisiting something. I like that about the website. I also like that we are not entirely driven by what people are talking about in the mainstream. We are more interested in like, we want to talk about this particular thing. And if we want to highlight, like we did on the day that we're actually recording this, the main post is about this case by a group of Zambian farmers who took a British origin but now Indian owned company, Vedanta, to the UK, to court in the UK, claiming that it's damaged how they've their ability to farm, and they've won the right to contest that case in a British court. We feel that that's an important thing for like how we think politically, and we wanted to run that on the front.
Yeah.
The second thing, which we'll talk about in a minute, is Northern Ghana doesn't get covered much politically. People, I mean, if you ask Ghanaians about politics, they'll talk about how there's a very South-centricness to Ghanaian politics. And in this instance, we wanted to cover what is a major thing in Northern Ghana, which is a conflict about chieftaincy. So I like that about the website, that we never get driven by the big themes. And then finally, we also will cover something that is sort of lingering in people's heads, but they don't want to talk about, like the whole vinyl record debate, or just topics that are there, but that people don't often talk about, but they don't write about, but they want to talk about.
And I think this type of work is harder to do. It takes longer. It takes more research. But at the end of the day, it's more meaningful.
And maybe this is, and we'll move on now to the quick short takes, because we're going to do this quick. Part of we're running. Part of it is also like if you look at like how we cover like say something like an ongoing crisis like the one in Sudan. We're not posting things every day. We're posting stuff when we have something to say. Of course, we're recognizing that that's probably the most, politically, like in terms of something that's changing and it's like urgent. But the way we're going to treat it is we want to, if we have people who want to say something interesting, we're going to cover it. In the meantime, we'll say, we send out a newsletter and we'll link to other people's work. We tweet. Put stuff on our Facebook page, we post stuff on the Instagram page, but the point is if we want to say something proper, it has to be edited properly, and that takes days. So you'll notice that Africa as a country doesn't necessarily always say something in the heat of the battle when everybody else is saying something about it. We might come the next week or the week after.
Also, when something catches like wildfire as a topic that spreads around and it becomes something that everybody's sharing, then there also has to be a reflection on what's actually going on right now, and that's what we're positioning to.
So we quickly want to do a couple of short takes so that we want to say and recommend. The first is like there's a really interesting article. It's an old debate, but it's a new fresh take by a young writer called Aaliyah Blackmore, Afro-Caribbean. I think her family came from Barbados, and she's actually doing interesting research on the carnival in the Caribbean. But she spent a summer in Cuba as a grad student, and she wrote about her encounters with Cuban women and their presence. Well, firstly their absence, and then the increasing presence on the internet. And then, so we want to recommend an article. I think it's called "Coming into Voice." We definitely want to recommend.
Coming to Voice in Cuba.
Yeah, we definitely want to recommend that.
And it raises some reflections on when you have a structure that is designed to promote egalitarianism in the way that it's organized.
Right.
There are some advantages to that, absolutely, but other things can be overlooked when there's a political pretense that everyone is equal. They may not always be treated equally, so these things also need to be considered in the way that such programs are rolled out.
And racing Cuba is a complicated topic. I mean, Cuba is a island that I think culturally it's a black country, but it wasn't always favorable to black people. I mean, you know,
in the way that it's been governed.
Yeah, slavery. I mean, there's a piece I wrote a while back when Fidel Castro died. I wrote a piece in the Guardian, and in one of the paragraphs I actually write and said, critics of Cuba pointed to the paradox of Cuba's African policy. While Cuba has a progressive foreign policy on race, at home Afro-Cubans have often been at odds with the Communist Party's failure to reflect the full range of Cuba's racial diversity in its leadership structures or to fully address racial politics. Cuba's regime did achieve more for Afro-Cubans in 50 years than previous administrations had in the last 400 years. But, as the Council on Hemispheric Affairs concludes, Castro's policies only addressed issues of unequal access without changing the structural basis underlying society. And it added, with the new wave of economic changes affecting the country, starting from the early 90s, race and racism are once again becoming important issues in Cuba. I mean, this was an article mostly about what Cuba was doing in Africa, but in it, there's this irony or this kind of paradox that a country that was doing, the solidarity with its African brothers and sisters, but at the same time it wasn't doing right by its own people.
So there's some lessons to be learned there.
And we could definitely recommend the article. The second quick take, because I know we're running out of time, is there's a really interesting piece called The Skin Politics in Northern Ghana. It has nothing to do with colorism or race, and should we give it away?
Sure, go ahead, yeah.
We could give a little bit of it away, but it's essentially, in the article, the writer who is based at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Technology, Amino Dramani, writes about how between 2007 and 2012, alone the UNDP had a report mapping conflict and pointed out 59 violent conflicts in the northern part of Ghana, and most of these conflicts are over political power, over who should govern an area. And in the northern part of Ghana, so in Ghana in general, when in sort of traditional forms of authority, when a chief or a king is appointed, this is generally referred to as installment, the stooling. But in certain parts of the north, the chief, the symbol of chiefly authority is not installment, but it's called skin, the skinning of somebody. The skin is a symbol of chiefly authority in northern Ghana, equivalent to the stool in the south. When a chief is skinned, he's seated in the skin of an ox, sacrificed for the occasion. And the article is really good at sort of like showing you this, although the conflicts over installment and skinment started in the 1930s under British colonialism, it really kicked off in the mid to late 50s, just before independence and after independence, and it got sort of entangled with party politics in Ghana, and it has led to, it then implicates like conflicts over land, over markets, over the naming of places, and opportunistically various regimes in Ghana have always exploited it. And the writer Aminu goes into how, for example, like the use of the circulation of guns, like there's a lot of arms circulating in this part of Ghana. We definitely want to recommend it. And my quick point about this is we have been actually, as I was mentioning at the start, there's not a lot often about northern Ghana, but we've been publishing a few pieces on northern Ghana. I would recommend that just people use the search engine and see more pieces in the archive about it. Yeah.
Skin politics in northern Ghana.
Yeah. Thirdly, we still on quick takes. I think we have a couple more minutes left. We want to mention an article on Sureya Bonari. Do you want to say who that is? And
This was a figure skater in France.
Late 90s, yeah.
Late 90s, and was a pioneer, competed in the Olympics, but it just goes into the background of...
She did like a backflip where she would land on like her one...
On the one skate, yeah.
On the one skate, which was incredible. Google it, it's incredible to watch, yeah.
And so Liz Timms has written about just the perception of Surya in the media, and linked it also to more contemporary discussions of black women in sports, and how they're talked about by journalists, how they're talked about by their competitors, talking about other athletes like Serena Williams, and gymnasts, Gabby Douglas, and Simone Biles.
Yeah.
So it is quite interesting because at this point Surya is not as famous, not as well recognized, especially probably beyond France.
She lives in the US, I think.
At this point?
Yeah,
okay.
I think she does. I think she lives in the US. She like runs, she does like training with kids. There's the impetus for this thing was Netflix has a series called Losers, which I've watched a lot of, where they basically just follow like the career of people who didn't win. Like there's this like Spanish guy, not French guy actually, who's like about to win the British Open, and the day of the last day, the last round, dude is like leading, and then he just starts messing it up, and it like set back. I think it set back golf in France. Like people were like, because people thought he was going to be a champion, and then he fails. Is that there's like this about like some obscure soccer teams in like sort of 1980s England. I mean, it's
as a sports person, this is really your show, huh?
you obviously trying to. This is your day to make beef. I've noticed that. Okay, so that's another article we want to mention quickly, and then just quickly two other articles that I'll just quickly do this.
In
don't run out of time. In a minute or two, we have a nice piece called "Invisible Noises in the Production of Knowledge," which is an article written by a collective group of scholars from Belgium mostly, and from the Congo, and they talk about like how knowledge is produced, and they then started the article links to like a blog series that they created called the Bukavu series, where they explore some of these questions around power, and like there's some great quotes in there about like, which we all know about. In South Africa, by the way, is infamous for these type of things. Field workers doing all the work, and then the white researcher, in this case the European researcher, in the South African case the South African white person, gets all the reputation while somebody else is doing the work. And so all those kind of ethics is being addressed in the series.
And there's a disconnect too in the way that the process, the methodology, and how information is gathered, when there aren't people who understand social context at all levels of the process.
And where the stuff gets published eventually, like it's mostly published in European journals. There's another, and the site is full of these pieces. There's another great piece by Grief Shelwo in the archive called Economics has an African Problem, which goes to some of these same issues. There was one on the writing of history, the Cambridge History of South Africa, which was like wall-to-wall white scholars, like what the hell. So like, there's a lot of those pieces on the site. Two other last ones, because I know our time's running out. We have a piece by Vic Sahoni on After the Scramble for Vinyl, which actually is in conversation with an older, very controversial piece on the website that was called The Scramble for Vinyl by Bometaka. And I know you want to say something, but I quickly want to drop this because I know our first segment is about to end. There's a really beautiful piece by Matthew Smith, a historian at the University of West Indies, about the famed Trinidadian literature scholar Michael Dash, who really wrote Haiti into the Caribbean, wrote it into Caribbean literature, wrote it into world literature, and he was an incredible person, and sadly he died of cancer a couple of weeks ago. I would really recommend Matthew's essay to people. We're back. We're recording, right?
Yeah,
we're back.
We're live, I hope.
We're live. We're back live. So for this section, we just wanted to celebrate what we think is a momentous decision for I think for all Africans. There's enough just for one group, but for all Africans, and I think it's
quite influential.
We'll go a little bit into some of the history of this, because we think it's an important milestone. On June 11, which is now about more than 10 days ago.
Yeah, 3 weeks ago.
This was why we were talking about. I think this was around the time that Binyavanga passed away. It was around that same time. It happened in the wake of his passing. Botswana's High Court ruled to overturn a law that goes back to colonialism that criminalized homosexuality. We'll have the wording of this ridiculous law in a minute. And this law would now, in Botswana, it would legalize same-sex relations, right? It does. It's not gay marriage. It just says it decriminalizes same-sex
acts.
Yeah. Because and as I said, we'll tell you in a minute, like what that comes from. But some of the things that we really thought was striking was some of the. Well, let's just say quickly, like where this date back to. So Botswana was colonized by Britain. It was I think it's in the mid to late 1800s, and the British brought a law that they already had, that they had criminalized homosexuality or homosexual acts since I think the 5th century. And they brought that law with them to their colonies, many of their colonies. They had a ton of them in Africa, in Asia, and they brought those laws to, they brought them here too, to the Americas. And they brought those laws, and these laws referred to gay sex as unnatural acts, that they defined as carnal knowledge against the order of nature. And you could go to prison at that time with this colonial law in Britain in Botswana, for up to 7 years. And so what usually happened was, over time, when independence came, people had sort of imbibed or naturalized these kind of ideas. So the new independent government,
Christianity plays a role.
Christianity played a role. Islam played a role in other parts, in former French colonies, in some British colonies. Islam also, conservative Islam, not all Islam, conservative Islam. I don't know if people saw Ilhan Omar took part in a Pride March. So there's all kinds. We also need to say this. There's not just one kind of Islam. There's, just as a little side note, there's all kinds of Christians too.
Of course.
But anyway, so more conservative notions of Christianity, conservative notions of Islam kind of fed into this. And so these more newly independent governments just continued these oppressive laws, marginalizing these populations, punishing people. I mean, at some point, they also even punished, like, probably extramarital sex, interracial sex. There's various, but longest on the books is same sex, like between gay men, lesbians, etc. So they won the case, and what we thought was really beautiful was some of the things that the judges said. One of the judges said, sexual orientation is not a fashion statement. This is it's a judge in Botswana saying it's an important attribute of one's personality. Another judge said, human dignity is harmed when minority groups are marginalized. And I'm going to let Zach actually, because we have some numbers, like we have to say something at least about the enormity, like of this kind of decision that in Africa,
and still in the world, I would say.
Still in the world too.
It doesn't have to be limited to the African continent.
But just specifically for the African continent, because we can't deny that there's a number of states, that are quite, in their reaction to homosexuality, it's quite violent to the gay community. Like in 32 of the 54 nations, there are laws that criminalize consensual. This is according to the New York Times, same-sex conduct. Well, the New York Times is quoting Human Rights Watch. And these things they have different names in different places. But 32 of 54, is that more than half? Yeah. It's about more than, it's just more than half of the countries that having said that, I think it's South Africa, explicitly though, South Africa is the first. So in some of these nations, there aren't any laws often.
It's not something that's explicitly discussed.
Right. Yeah. And there's no law, but it wouldn't be. It's not safe to be gay. you know, if 34 of them have laws, but there's a whole bunch. Yeah, it's not protected either. But then there are countries where it is, and the country, I don't know if you, I think you have the same notes, but in the South Africa, right, is the first country on the continent to decriminalize homosexuality. This was 4 years after independence, and this shows you another thing. It's nothing to do with race. Apartheid was a white government. The British were white. So if you say, the Africans is because they black, they're terrible. Nah, son, it has nothing to do with that. It's if you have progressive governments, they're gonna make changes. So South Africa, after the end of apartheid,
new constitution,
96. I know this kind of stuff.
Oh, really? Okay.
96 constitution. I'm just messing with you. So the Joburg High Court ruled that South Africa's sodomy laws violated that new constitution.
Yes.
The 96 constitution. And then in 2006, South Africa legalized gay marriage. And when they did that, we found this out earlier when we were reading, it
was only the 5th country in the whole world that had ever done that.
And you know what, I'm going like this right now because when people do these debates about gay rights, they act like Africans are not thinking about these things, are not thinking them, you know, are not acting, are not trying to change the world, just because they might not be doing, the struggles take a different turn. And there's been actually pieces on Africa's country about like tactically, how do you go about making these changes happen? And everybody, I mean, Biavanga, bless his you know, his soul, he actually had this great quote actually about that, like how people just sort of like, dark as Africa, people do terrible things to gays. We're not denying that that's happening, but at the same time, he made a point of saying, people in Africa are doing work around these issues. They are invested in making these things. So South Africa, the 5th country to make it happen. And before South Africa, it was.
Let me also just say that laws don't always, and really almost never, ensure that things are really safe.
We're not there yet. Let's celebrate first. Okay. We have a note here, and I know you're jumping in there.
I'm just making comments.
We have a note here that says, but.
All right, read your
having said, and then I'm going to cue you and say, Zach, jump in. Having said, but before South Africa,
when I feel,
oh my Lord, okay, don't tell you. This is like the Nipsey Hussle BET Awards when the mom is touching the.
Are we spouses now? Come on.
Hold on. What did the moms? What did the dad said? Do your thing.
You do your thing.
You do your thing over there. Oh, that was crazy. I should just say this. I've been trying to write a piece about Nipsey Hussle's some of the stuff around the
background stuff.
But I'll get to that. Anyway, that was just saying like he's being Nipsey Hussle's dad right now. It's like
just let me make my speech.
You do your thing. I'll speak when I want to. But before South Africa, Spain in 2005, that was the first country to legalize gay marriage. After Spain, Canada, right? And then
before South Africa, you're going in reverse. So Spain was 4th, then Canada 3rd, Belgium 2nd. He's like,
do your thing.
Do your thing. First in 2000.
It's actually just like me right there.
It's quite remarkable. Do your thing.
Oh!
It's quite remarkable that actually there was no country until even the year 2000.
I know,
that had protected this right.
We think of like places like the Netherlands, where I think gay pride may come from the Netherlands. I'm not sure, but like you think of those places of being like super progressive, but then you realize, whoa, they didn't until 2000. They only decided, oh, we should have gay. And we looked at, I think it was the Pew Research Center. There was a total of
28 total countries.
Oh, we didn't forget the number, yeah. And the last country to legalize gay marriage is Taiwan,
which was just a couple weeks ago, last month.
And in Africa, apparently in Africa since 2010, several more countries, again quoting the New York Times, in Southern Africa have decriminalized same-sex relations, including Mozambique, Angola, and Lesotho. And we gotta give them props. I totally missed this. That these, I think we're so obsessed with South Africa that we miss.
You are.
Oh, do your thing.
All right, let's keep it moving.
God. Wait. This is another case of Nipsey Hussle's dad, bro. You're just like dissing me right now.
We need to cut that clip and just paste it here every time.
So having said all of that, actually, and one other quick thing before we move on from Botswana, it's also, I mean, one of the things I think about Botswana, we try to get somebody actually to write a piece on this. We've been talking to a number of people. Some people have been involved in the case to just kind of like write about the enormity of this moment, and also write about how activism in Botswana made this happen. Like what are the tactics they followed that made something like this?
It doesn't just happen, and it also comes from other cases that lead to a Supreme Court.
And you also needed like in public life in Botswana, you needed people to like say this is the right thing to do. So you've had like former, I think it was Festus Mogai, who has spoken out on AIDS prevention. I think at one point he had made a comment about gay rights. The current president, last September, I think, is quoted as saying, just like other citizens, gay people deserve to have their rights protected. This is Mokgetsi Masisi,
which is a major statement that affects wider.
Yeah, if your president says it, I mean, and this just to be the having said, which is where you'll jump in at one point. In the having said category, you know, if you take South Africa, which is way ahead of most other African countries on gay rights, it's also the case that, like, whereas say like Nelson Mandela was you know, very explicit and consistent about these things, so was Thabo Mbeki. Well, there was an interim president, this guy called Kgalema Motlanthe, but Jacob Zuma was like, would openly make like lots of homophobic statements. I think
comments,
at one point he said, like, if I ran into a gay person, when I was a kid, if we ran into gay people, we'll beat them up. I think he said something like that, to that effect.
So if you contrast that kind of presidential rhetoric with what was happening in Botswana more recently, it's quite different, and it affects the whole tone of the conversation.
The interesting about South Africa, though, of course, is that in South Africa, I think I just scratched my toe. I hope that's not on camera. The interesting thing in South Africa is that the constitution there is actually very powerful, like the law, the constitution. So whatever Jacob Zuma says, to change he'd have to go to court to change it, and so he's not able to do that. Having said that, having said that continues. It is also the case that just before that case in Botswana, like a month before that, in May, in Kenya, the High Court there argued that homosexuality, the argument that was used by judges there, is that it clashed with their traditional values.
Traditional values. Yeah. So they failed to decriminalize homosexuality. And in the past, Uhuru Kenyatta has also said this issue is a priority. I think when Hillary Clinton was trying to make a little bit of a push
being interviewed by somebody
on the continent, and he made a statement saying this may be a priority elsewhere. It's not something that we're going to prioritize. We have other things that we want to deal with to serve our people right now. This is not something that we want to move on.
Yeah, I would recommend, I think it was in April last year, he was being interviewed by Christian Amanpour on CNN, when he said sort of like, that's not important to us. I don't like...
And the interesting thing about the way he spoke was that he spoke broadly in a representative way of all Kenyans, but also representing African people as a larger group, which was quite interesting.
And to be honest, it was very powerful. If you're a homophobe or if you don't believe gay people should have rights, because he's sort of seen as a kind of important political figure on the continent. Like he's the president of one of the most powerful countries, like South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt. If their leaders speak up on these matters, then it has kind of some ripple effect on how others relate to it. We've run a couple of pieces on this. There is a piece from a while back that we ran. We ran it before the court case. I think it was sort of linked to the film Rafiki, which is a beautiful film about a relationship between two young women in Nairobi. I mean, the piece we ran was called "Will Kenya's Government Let Gay People Live?"
The film was banned there. As soon as it came out.
Although then opportunistically they tried to unban it so that they could qualify for the Oscars
for a limited period, and then
so that they could show it So like their bigotry is just like, let's suspend our bigotry for a minute so we could get a, it's very opportunistic, so we could get a prize, and then we reinstitute it once we've gotten our prize. And then which leads us to the piece we really want to hype, which is this piece called African homophobia
and the colonial roots of African conservatism.
Yeah.
So that's quite a fascinating piece, and this may be new for some people.
Right.
So I really highly recommend reading it. It gets into the history of how customary laws came to be inscribed through colonial interactions with different African peoples, who were also being, the groups of people as ethnicities were also being formed and shaped through their interactions with colonial,
right.
missions and even evangelical missions on the continent as well, that were out there trying to especially bring Christianity in Southern Africa. So many people that didn't necessarily think of themselves as part of a group because of their physical location, because some language similarities, they were given titles as
members of a tribe.
And then these tribes were also kind of ascribed values that were then put into law.
Right.
Much of which was facilitated, especially in Anglophone Southern Africa, through the British. And then these things are thought of now as what is the African tradition that somebody like Uhuru Kenyatta is quoting. We don't do this. Look at the way we've acted for a long time, but it makes, this article does a great job of saying, who is the we that you're talking about? And if you go back far enough, this is actually not something that had been part of the social life.
Well, that's what we said. Like
when I say it is not something, I mean the law. A law like forbidding this behavior, or the attitude in discriminating against it, was not part of the societies at that time.
And there's some great references. He refers to the work of Mark Epprecht, this book called Heterosexual Africa. It's with a question mark. It's a study of pre-colonial African sexualities, and there's a quote in there where he quotes Mark writing about a Portuguese document from 1558 observed, quote, unnatural damnation, unquote, a euphemism for male-to-male sex, to be esteemed among the Congo. This was a very powerful kingdom, it was the modern Angola and the DRC. Andrew Battle, who lived among the Ibangala in modern-day Angola in the 1590s, was similarly disapproving. They are beastly in their living, for they have men in women's apparel, whom they keep among their wives. Jean-Baptiste Labat, cribbing from an Italian explorer in the same region of Angola, also described a caste of cross-dressing male diviners known as Chibados or Kimbandos, Bandas. From elsewhere in Africa also came hints of African men who expressed same-sex practices in the idioms of traditional medicine or magic. There were also unspoken erotic relationships between African women within the rubric of spirit, mediumship, or divination. So it's like none of this was new.
There's also practices in certain areas, in social circumstances, where a woman may also be taking another woman as a bride.
A bride. Yeah.
These things were also part of different customs that had sometimes nothing to do with sexuality.
One of the interesting things in this debate is like when people say like African culture confronts homosexuality. And then therefore we had to make the laws to protect African culture against this thing that's coming upon us. If you read the history, it's like, no, gay sex was there. It was as African, I used to joke on Twitter and say, it was as African as pop. Like it was like, it's who you are, it's part of the community, it's like to have gay people was part of the fabric. But it's sort of flipped, and the history gets invented. And he has another great, Kamau has another great quote in the piece. Sorry, I'm messing up his name here. Is it Kamau?
Let's see.
You can put that on film.
Yeah.
Kamau. Hi Kamau, what's up? He has this great quote where he refers to a piece by Alok Gupta in a book called This Alien Legacy, where he writes, and this is Gupta, he's quoting Gupta, fears of moral infection from the, quote, native environment made it urgent to insert anti-sodomy provisions in the colonial code. A sub-tradition of British imperialist writing warned of widespread homosexuality in the countries that Britain colonized. The explorer Richard Burton, for instance, postulated a sotadic zone stretching around the planet's midriff from 40 degrees north of the equator to 30 degrees south, in which the vice is popular and endemic. The European codifiers certainly felt they had a mission of moral reform to correct and Christianize native customs. It's just like, it's a really long piece, and he has a great ending which I like, and I'm just going to take the liberty to read it. What was the phrase again? Do your thing.
Do your thing.
Do your thing. When a Kenyan senator appears in court, because there was a Kenyan senator, his name appears at the top of the piece, to speak on behalf of customary opposition to homosexuality, he's simply continuing the colonial practice of enforcing original customary law in native courts. He's an exact replica of the customary agents that characterize colonial courts in Africa, a colonial agent in a post-colonial world. Uhuru Kenyatta and Robert Mugabe, because Robert Mugabe has a history of anti-gay rhetoric, are not really saying, quote, it is against the African culture in their warnings to white folks not to preach gay rights in Africa. Because now you've got like full circle. Now you got like black people telling white people not to talk about gay rights.
That's right.
They're really saying, quote, it is against the African culture you gave us, and we intend to remain the proper Africans you taught us to be. I mean, this is a really beautiful piece, and I would really recommend that people go read it. And I should just go like this. I'm pretending to be young. Kamau, well done.
The quotes that are used are really powerful.
Yeah.
And I think what's especially great about this piece, there's a lot of pieces that are informative that we have
Right.
on the site, but this one really challenges understanding and thinking about history in a way that I think is uncommon. It goes further and harder than many other pieces or many other news stories do.
And used like a framework about something else, like how we write about the invention of tribe.
Which is, I don't think,
but use it in an argument to make an argument, yeah, about gay rights. So brilliantly done. We definitely want to recommend people read it. Okay, so we're back again. We're doing segments. And our third segment, we want to just end it, but we have to talk about this because I think it's important to highlight this. This is a big case in Uganda. I think for about 130 days now, or more than 130 days, or even more. Stella Nyanzi, who is a feminist, poet, writer, academic, is in prison. She was arrested, I think, last September, maybe it was, when she had, quite a while back, she had written a Facebook post in November. She wrote a Facebook post saying, Yoweri, which is the name of the president, Museveni, who's been in power since 1986, when he led an armed rebellion against the government, previous government of a guy called Milton Obote, very oppressive. And he said I was going to bring democracy, but it turns out he has the trimmings of democracy. Elections, but it's essentially kind of a police state. It feels like a police state. There's some movement, people are protesting, there's intellectual culture, but from what Ugandans tell you, is that it's not great.
There's not so much space for opposition politics. Any other...
Yeah, as long as you operate within the NRM, which is the National Revolutionary Movement of Museveni's party, and as long as you're okay with his family running anything and his cronies and so on, and then everything is fine. There's a lot of police brutality. We'd recommend, like, actually this, what's the singer called again? Bobby Wine. We've had pieces on him. And just some of, I mean, he's not going to become president, but just as an oppositional figure and as a figure people can sort of use to like make their comments about the government, it's not the greatest place to live in. Stella Nyanzi is this, the fact that, I think it's important to mention she's a woman, and as a woman speaking up in a very kind of male-dominant political culture. But she wrote a poem, she wrote a piece on Facebook the day after his birthday, there's another part of this piece which is his alleged birthday. It's unclear. He doesn't want to tell people when he was born. He said, "How bit you're wary. They say it was your birthday yesterday. How bitterly sad a day." She then went on to write about like how the Uganda would have been, if he was not born, she said Uganda would have spared the oppression, suppression, corruption, the demise of public institutions, unemployment, bad governance, and the erosion of morality in society. And I won't read she went in. She went in like her criticisms of him, and she got arrested.
Misuse of
a computer
based on some.
It's a law. It's actually a law, by the way. It's a law, yeah.
To limit people's online social activity. They also famously have a tax on social media, which limits the amount of access that people have to be able to criticize, because I think they realize that people who are younger, who are accessing these services, may not be as excited about status quo, elder statesman politics. So.
And the thing is, they actually didn't arrest her at her house. They arrested her a couple of days later. I think she had gone to get clearance to organize a protest at a police station. And when she got to the police station, it was about some other issue about her post at the Makerere Institute of Social Research, MISER, which is a local institute attached but independent from the Makerere University. And she had gone to get a permit there for a protest and got arrested for this, for this Facebook thing, and she's been in prison ever since. They also said her poem was obscene and deviating from African culture. So at the heart of this is really like...
Which is a similar argument that we just talked about, bringing back...
This is the day of African culture.
The definition of somebody's deciding what is African culture.
It's usually if you don't agree with power.
Obscenity.
Yeah. But yeah, so the interesting thing is like people have been organizing, and the piece itself goes a lot into like where people have organized, mostly on social media.
But there's a lot of people that go to the court whenever she has a hearing. There's a movement.
Yeah, you were just there recently.
I was
right?
in Uganda relatively recently.
Yeah.
I've spoken to people that are supporters of hers who attend, and also I spoke to one of her lawyers as well, and the cases are popular. People turn out. People use it as an opportunity also to continue the movements and the criticisms that she started. So.
And we have a really long piece, again, to talk about what we have on the site. We have a really long piece by Besigwe Mwezigire, Isaac Semakade, who's a lawyer, Kukua Manfu, who's a Ghanaian architect. And actually the reason we asked them to write the piece together was Kukua had organized a protest in Ghana. I thought that was another interesting part of this. Maybe at some point, I don't know, I'm making the appeal directly, she will write about this, because I think this is about something else also, about a new kind of Pan-Africanism, where some kids in Ghana, or some people in Ghana go and they're not kids by the way, there's a very Americanism there for young people. You had some people in Ghana having a protest in support of having Stella and Nyanzi released. I think that's very interesting. Like this kind of, usually, the usual thing is like, I'm in support of the French, some event in France, and I put the French flag on my Facebook, and something happened in America, and good, like Black Lives Matter, like people are quick to make those connections. But I like the fact that people in between African countries, people are making connections now.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a protest in Ghana in support of Stella and Nyanzi, and then finally Margaret Namulyanga, who's a playwright, a Ugandan playwright who's done some plays here on the East Coast in the US. They wrote this piece together, and it's a really nice long piece that takes you through the case, that makes some recommendations about what you can do to put pressure on the Ugandan government. Yeah, it's an incredible piece of, like a very long piece, and many of these people, they care about the case. They very Besigwe and them. They've worked. They've known her. They've gone to visit her. So we get like a nice sort of first-hand account.
And the piece comes as she celebrates her 45th birthday in jail. And she had written 45 poems for the occasion. So I think through other channels as well, they're trying to get some of those poems out there to show that the creativity is still flowing, and she's really fighting.
Yeah, there was also a bunch of poems that were published on the day, right? On her birthday that they published. Yeah, they've got a number of hashtags that you can use to highlight the case. They have some ideas if you want to do solidarity events wherever you are. They mentioned, actually, and I mentioned the Ghanaian protest in Accra. There were also protests in Oxford, in the UK, or you can send donations to a legal team, mobile money, etc., and so on.
The legal team, by the way, is amazing. They're doing it out of total passion. It's not some corporate law firm. It's
right.
People who really believe in the values of an open democratic society, and are fighting for everybody. What I learned when I was over there speaking to them is that Stella herself and the people working with her, they view the work not just as an individual's case, but her activism is proving a point that other people can learn from, that is shifting the entire legal system in how rights are viewed. It's not just what one person can say on the computer. It's how does society view, what can be discussed in a democratic society. What does that really mean for them? And it's also worth noting, this is something that they highlighted for me too, which actually is so powerful and makes you understand her position better. She's not poor. She's an academic. She's had work for some time.
She's well traveled.
I think she comes from a middle class background. She could pay bail and leave and continue the cases in a different way, but she chooses,
or go in exile or something.
She chooses to stay in jail. It's a choice.
I think she got a fellowship.
It's a choice she's making to be able to highlight the issues that other people may face if they can't afford bail, for example. So these are really powerful, just subtle points that if you spend a little bit more time with this article and with the case, you learn more about. It's not just a little freedom of speech thing.
Correct.
It's a whole shift of thinking in the legal community around the rights that citizens have.
And the tactics that people use there, so people are also aware that just spending all your energy screaming Museveni must go is not very good politics. That you have to, you can in the process of making protests, you can construct you construct the rules of what the future could be like. You can't just get, so it's fine to get rid of Museveni, but we can begin to think also what would it be like to use the law.
And the law should work for everyone. It's it's striving for a functional legal system that is effective,
right?
And it's fair.
And I know we got to move on, but it's funny. I'm thinking just of a Bobby Wine song where he released a song, I think, on New Year's Day, which is something about what are we going to do the day we win? And the video is really interesting to watch. I would recommend it. It's like a policeman not taking a bribe. So these two guys on the border, the bikes. They come and they get stopped by a cop, and then they think the cop wants a bribe, and the cop gives one of them a motorcycle helmet to put on. So it's there's also a way in which people are thinking beyond, as I said, Museveni must go. They're thinking about how would we organize ourselves as a society? How would the law work? What's the job of a cop? What's the job of local government? What's a public representative? I think that's way. But this is the point of what we're trying to do with the site. We want people to think about these things in that way. How can we live beyond screaming, get rid of that one and get rid of this one?
And
because once you get rid of that one, you got to do the work.
Of course, I was going to say. Or if you remove this one person, then there's somebody else that may take their place who's just as bad or worse. So you really have to understand the structures and the societal shifts that create better lives and material realities for people. rather than just focusing on sentiment around an individual.
I'm hungry. So quickly,
don't be hangry.
I'm not going to say much about this except to say there's a piece coming up in the next, which we definitely can recommend. It's going to be on the site on Instagram and the Sudanese revolution and the tensions
Sounds really
of like,
interesting, yeah.
which is a bit like, I mean, this article, the Stella Nyanzi article, is sort of linked to that, but there's kind of like organizing campaigns online, linking up between off and online, and it shows you like some of the pitfalls of like social media organizing. Because Instagram, in the past when you wrote about these things, usually people wrote about Facebook and Twitter, but Instagram is becoming an important social media
it is.
like space. I mean, this woman Dana Boyd actually has written about sort of some of the racial and class politics of what social media people use, and so Instagram is growing. It's definitely a medium that I think is favored among like young Africans in general, you know, like young people in general, but I think young Africans in particular, and so it goes into that. And then finally, I want to make a quick pitch to people, and I want to encourage people to submit pieces. We sent out a tweet earlier today saying, remember our great coverage of the World Cup in 2018, and sent you to a link to a great series that we did on that World Cup, and I would recommend that people go look at that series. And we oh, here we go, I'm just calling it out, but it was an excellent series. The design of that page is really nice. Look at that. We're gonna put this on the screen and like
great images,
scroll. Just
I
love this kind of design. But anyway, we're encouraging people to do the same for this. There's a bunch of tournaments this summer, mostly football. But if you want to write about other sports, do that. Copa Oro, which is the Gold Cup year. I don't care much for that competition. I think I read a quote the other day by a Mexican fan who told, I think it was like Copa, which is this website, this YouTube channel about football, and said something like, I think he said that the Copa is like ice cream. Like it's like dessert. Mexicans don't take this Copa, this Gold Cup seriously. So this Gold Cup, this tournament that gets played in the United States, well, they have a couple of matches in Costa Rica this time. Ooh,
totally different.
Ooh, it's basically a US-centric tournament, and you know I'm betting it's gonna be like US, Mexico. Usually they make it to the finals, semifinals. But interestingly, this time around, in Group B, Haiti finished on top. Okay, bring back the glory days of 1974, which I won't go into that, was a twist. That was a team heavily supported by a dictator. But that was Haiti's best team, Emmanuel Sagnon. But Haiti's doing really well. They're on top of their group. They're playing really well. I'm really rooting for them. If you want to check on Twitter, Lauren Du Bois, who's at Duke University, soccer politics, he's been tweeting a lot. I think he went to a match, the match that they won against Costa Rica. He was at the game. I think it's in North Carolina, or maybe it was here in New York. So I would definitely want people to write for us about that tournament, particularly about the teams of mostly African descended players, or you know, in the Caribbean particularly. I think Guadeloupe is in there. They might still be in for a run. Curaçao has been playing well. Also, these like small islands. I mean, this is the best place for many of these teams that they're going to play football at. They're not going to go to the World Cup.
Because it's tough to get to the World Cup.
So this is their big turnout. And
also because of things that we've talked about before with FIFA and the way that they only take certain numbers of teams from some regions. So it's stacked against.
And you don't often have the infrastructure. If you're Jamaica, maybe Trinidad, USA, Mexico, Costa Rica, you have a better chance of making it to these tournaments because you have players playing at the top leagues in Europe. You know what I'm saying? Or you have working leagues. Many of these countries don't even have a league. Quickly to the other cups, Copa America is currently happening in Brazil. It's the usual. Argentina wins, draws by playing ugly. I don't know why they're still in the competition. They have no tactics. They just want to leave the ball, pass it to Messi. And for the rest, they hack. Then there's like Chile. Chile, you know, plays with so much like passion and power. Uruguay, very organized. That's why apparently they all end up at Inter. At the Italian clubs apparently. Brazil, surprisingly, has been good. But again, we're really interested in those connections about what happens, what's the connection between what's on the field and what's in the stand and in the broader society, as we're saying,
media,
beyond the boundary, like what happens beyond the field. Make those linkages for us. The Women's World Cup, I want to end with this. I'm going to be frank, I've been kind of disappointed by this Women's World Cup. I feel like it's like being in a time warp. It's essentially like Euro-American teams dominate the thing. I mean, it's not a secret why. It's because they have infrastructure, they have investment, they have leagues.
They game the system in terms of how many countries can qualify.
I mean, cricket is a bit like that too, yeah. But well, I think the gaming the system has less to do with this. Actually, that is true. This is true.
There's all different issues
from Africa, only 3 teams.
Yeah,
only from Africa you can only have 3 teams. From Asia, I think you can have 2 or 3. But from Europe, there's a stack from Europe. I think they get like 10 spots or something, and there's like a stack from the I'm not sure how many Americas get, but you're definitely right. There's an imbalance in how this thing works. But it also means like it's predictable about who's going to win.
For the most part.
And for some bizarre reason, and this is, I think I read somewhere that football is a sport with a million opinions. It also seems like this thing called VAR, which was supposed to take out that surprise element out of football, or the debate. You know, in soccer is the one place, football. Soccer is the one place where you can for years debate something. Was Maradona's use of his hand, was it a handball or was it a hand of God? Was it an act of, was it a decolonial act?
I see.
And you could spend and debate that forever. Or you can watch a game of ball is in the net and the ref will say it wasn't. So now you got this thing called VAR, which was supposed to take that element out of the game. It actually is not.
To make things fair.
It hasn't. Like if you watch it, you have, I'll be frank, African teams, South American teams have really been at the, or lower ranked teams, it's in, they get the short end of the stick in like the VAR decision. Because you can have VAR, but a whole host of other things about that team is aggressive, or even if they are aggrieved, they are aggressive. Cameroon's got a lot of, so like when Scotland got robbed by VAR, it was sympathy. When Cameroon gets robbed by VAR, it's like, oh, look how they are, how they react, blah blah blah. The same way with
it's the right answer.
It's the same with Nigeria. So VAR hasn't solved. Technical things can't solve how the world is organized, my friend. And we really want people to write about this World Cup. And I said, I'm not. I've lost interest at various points in this World Cup. I mean, it sounds. I'm not being patronizing. I love women's football, and I think it's incredible to watch. I watch it in the same way I watch men's football, but I get turned off by just how it just feels like a time warp, and it's not fun. Sounds like I'm a sore loser, but it's not fun as an African to watch this thing and go like, come on. So like I think Cameroon scored a goal at one point that was disallowed. Yeah, like retaking penalties like twice, then saying like because you moved, but the player from that team's foot was all, but you meticulously can note that they moved, but you can't see their foot over the line.
And then the amount that is moved would normally like never be called because it's so small anyway.
Yeah, don't get me started. Anyway, send us your pictures. It's Sean, S-E-A-N, at africasacountry.com, or go via the website. There's a form you fill out.
It's pretty easy.
Ideas at Africa as a Country, I think is the email address. Just send it in. We look forward to it. We really want to, because I will tell you, go through those posts from last summer. It was some of the best football writing of that World Cup. I'm going to say that unparalleled. It was really. There's some great writing in there. But probably the best one of the lot was the piece by Gregory Pirot. It was called Fear of a Black France. It still is one of the best football pieces, or pieces of writing on that World Cup. Well, I would say about football and its connection to beyond the stadium or any sport. The Cricket World Cup is also just happened. South Africa is out. He hates cricket. I've been watching the cricket. It's been nice. Mostly only the South African games. But the South Africans lost to Pakistan. With that, they're out of the competition. Which the big question is, which we're going to leave you with. We don't have to answer it yet.
Is this the big question?
You can put it in the YouTube comments. So you can't. So South Africa's out. There's no more African teams left in this. Another time we can talk about the South African cricket team. The South African cricket team is very.
Can you tell your
it's
cricket
very,
joke that you had before?
What was it cricket joke? No, no.
It was more
The
suitable
one my
for,
brother-
like,
the one my
for a
brother
WhatsApp
said.
group.
Yeah, suitable for WhatsApp. Not that I condone these type of jokes. Just gonna make that clear. Anyway,
You didn't
we're
originally
gonna
tell
end
it,
by
you
saying
heard it.
we're gonna end by saying the greeting. Do your thing.
Do your thing.
Do your
Just
thing.
do your thing.
Just do your thing. Just for the people watching, do your thing. We're gonna end with that. That wraps up. This is episode 5.
5, yeah.
Go well, people. Enjoy the week. Thank you. Take care.